The fire's aftermath turned Thunder Valley into a powder keg ready to explode. With the trading post storeroom gutted, food supplies plummeted to dangerously low levels. Bartram Cole announced emergency rationing even stricter than before, 1 pound of flour per family per week. No exceptions, prices doubled on what little remained. Families who had been barely scraping by now faced genuine starvation if the supply line didn't reopen soon. The temporary footbridge over Knife Cut Gorge was nearly complete, the railroad crew promised, but nearly didn't fill empty bellies or quiet crying children. Worse than hunger was the suspicion that poisoned the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Cole loudly accused outside agitators and criminal elements of setting the fire, pointing fingers at anyone who had opposed him. The Lakota camp, the Chinese miners, even Deputy Ward for undermining legitimate authority. Ward questioned everyone who had been near the trading post after dark, but with half the town engaged in rescue operations at the mine. Alibis were thin and memories conveniently foggy. Albert Crane made a public show of donating $50 toward rebuilding supplies, positioning himself as Thunder Valley's savior, while tightening the noose around Lucille's throat. Everywhere she went, eyes followed some sympathetic, most calculating how much trouble she represented. Dr. Hart continued working around the clock as the fever slowly released its grip, though 2 more patients died, despite her best efforts, an infant too weak to fight, and a young mother who simply gave up after losing her child. Amos Green lay in the surgery with bandaged ribs, unable to move, without agony, watching helplessly as his 15-year-old son tried and failed to manage the water runs alone. The spring barrels came half empty now, water slopping over the sides, precious liquid wasted in the dust. People began hoarding again, hiding what little they had, turning neighbor against neighbor in the primal mathematics of survival. Into this volatile situation, Neshoba and Lucille prepared to break into Cole's private office and find the final evidence they needed. They met after midnight in the hayloft, speaking in whispers, barely audible over the wind that had picked up after the rain, rattling the stable walls. Neshoba had spent the evening scouting, memorizing patrol patterns and sight lines. Cole sleeps in the room above the trading post. Front entrance is bolted from inside with a crossbar. I watched him drop into place at sunset. But there's a rear window high up protected by iron bars. The bars are old, set in mortar that's crumbling. I think we can pry them loose without making too much noise. And if we're caught, Lucille kept her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. We run, fast and hard. I know 3 different routes out of town that avoid the main street. If we get separated, you head north to my people's camp. They'll hide you until things settle. He handed her the pry bar and a dark shawl. Cover your hair. Keep to shadows. When I move, you move. No hesitation, no second guessing. Trust me to get you through this. I trust you. The words came easily, surprising her with their simple truth. They slipped through Thunder Valley's sleeping streets like ghosts, avoiding the few patches of lamplight still burning. Dogs slept. Horses dozed in corrals. The town lay exhausted from crisis after crisis, too tired even for proper vigilance. At the trading post's rear wall, Neshoba braced himself against the building and boosted Lucille up to the high window. She wedged the pry bar behind the bars and pulled with every ounce of strength she possessed. The old iron groaned, but held fast, mortar refusing to release its grip. She repositioned, found better leverage, and pulled again. This time something cracked, not the bars themselves, but the mortar around the mounting bolts. Progress. Neshoba climbed up beside her on the narrow ledge, adding his weight to the pry bar. Together, they pulled in synchronized effort muscles, straining breath, coming hard. With a grating screech that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet night, the bars tore free from their moorings in a shower of ancient mortar dust. They froze, listening. Above them, Cole's snoring continued, uninterrupted, a rhythmic rumble like distant thunder. No other sound suggested alarm. Neshoba carefully set the bars aside and tested the window unlatched, an oversight born of arrogance or habit. It swung inward on protesting hinges. They squeezed through into a storage room stacked with empty crates and damaged goods, then crept down a narrow hallway that smelled of tobacco smoke and old paper. The office door stood closed, but not locked, another piece of carelessness. Neshoba eased it open with glacial slowness, revealing a cramped space dominated by a heavy desk, filing cabinets, shelves lined with ledgers. Moonlight through the front window provided barely enough illumination to navigate. Lucille moved to the desk, while Neshoba kept watch at the door positioned so he could see both the hallway and the street outside. She rifled through papers scattered across the desktop, bills of lading, inventory lists, promissory notes from desperate townspeople, nothing immediately useful. She tried the desk drawers. Locked. She pulled out the small folding knife Neshoba had given her and worked the simple lock mechanism, grateful for skills learned as a child when her brothers had delighted in hiding her belongings in locked boxes. The drawer popped open. Inside, buried under more mundane paperwork, she found a leather document folder. Her hands shook as she opened it by moonlight. Letters. A dozen at least, correspondence between Bartram Cole and Maurice Breton, spanning 8 months. She scanned them rapidly, her heart hammering so hard she feared it would wake Cole upstairs. The first letter, dated February, "I heard you're looking for business opportunities in your territory. I have a proposal. Women with debts to my operation sometimes flee west. I pay finder's fees for their return, $200 per recovery, $50 bonus if merchandise is undamaged and accompanying property intact. Interested, terms negotiable." M. Breton Cole's reply, Breton interested. My position gives me access to mail-order bride advertisements and arrival schedules. Can arrange safe custody and transfer. Suggest trial arrangement to establish trust. B. Cole. Later correspondence grew more explicit. Breton described Lucille specifically. The Renard woman owes $326 plus interest. She fled Montreal with approximately $150 cash and forged credentials. She'll respond to matrimonial advertisements, test her with a well-crafted letter from a respectable rancher. When she arrives, hold her in the bag. My men will collect. You get $200 plus whatever's in the bag. Consider it advance payment for future transactions. M.B. Cole's response confirmed the deal arranged. Local Lakota scout has dying brother. Will use him as front. Brother writes letters I co-sign as witness for authenticity. She'll come. I'll ensure safe delivery. Agree to terms. B.C. The most recent letter, dated just 1 week ago, Cole. My men arrive Tuesday. Keep Renard contained. If she proves difficult, use local law to detain her until collection. I've provided writs that should suffice. After this transaction succeeds, I'll send 3 more prospects monthly. Steady income for you, steady supply for me. This arrangement benefits us both. M.B. Lucille's vision blurred with rage. Cole hadn't just participated in fraud, he had orchestrated it from the beginning, selling her to Breton, before she even left Montreal, using Chayton's desperation as convenient cover. The co-signed letters, the promises of supplies, the acting justice of the peace authority, so lies built on lies, a trap constructed carefully over months. Neshoba, she breathed. Look at these. This is everything we need. He crossed to her side, scanning the letters rapidly, his face darkening with each page. This is conspiracy kidnapping and unlawful procurement across territorial lines, organized fraud across territorial lines. This goes beyond local law. This is federal crime. If we can get these to the right authorities. Floorboards creaked overhead. They froze. Cole's snoring had stopped. Footsteps moved across the ceiling directly above them, slow shuffling, heading toward the stairs. He was awake. Out. Now. Neshoba hissed, scooping up the letters and shoving them inside his shirt. They ran for the storage room, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, a door opened. Cole's voice bellowed, "Who's down there? I hear you, you thieving bastards." They dove through the window as footsteps thundered down the stairs. Neshoba dropped first, landing cat-like, then caught Lucille as she jumped. A gunshot cracked the night Cole, firing blind through the doorway, buckshot chewing splinters from the window frame where Lucille's head had been seconds earlier. They sprinted across open ground toward the alley between buildings as another blast tore through the air pellets, singing past close enough to feel the wind of their passage. Thieves, murderers, fire setters. Cole's voice rose to a shriek. "Ward, somebody get Ward. They're robbing me." Dogs erupted into frenzied barking. Lamps kindled in windows throughout the town. Boots hit porches as men emerged armed and confused. Lucille and Neshoba reached the alley and pelted through it, dodging rain barrels and stacked crates emerging onto the side street. The livery stable stood 50 yards ahead, safety and defensible ground. They covered the distance in seconds, burst through the doors, and slammed the bar across just as the first pursuers rounded the corner. Fists hammered on the wood. Cole's voice barely coherent with fury. "Open up! They've got my property. They've stolen documents. Ward, get here now." Neshoba pulled Lucille deeper into the shadows, both of them gasping for breath, hearts racing. He positioned himself where he could watch the door and the hayloft ladder simultaneously, hand on his rifle. "When Ward gets here," Neshoba said between breaths, "we tell him everything. Show the letters. Cole's finished." But when the stable doors finally burst open minutes later, it wasn't Deputy Ward who entered first. It was Albert Crane and his two companions, pistols drawn and leveled. "Step out where we can see you clearly," Crane said in that same pleasant tone he always used, as though discussing nothing more serious than the weather. "Or I'll shoot through the stalls until I hit something living. Your choice. Make it quickly." Neshoba pushed Lucille behind him and stepped into the lamplight. Someone had brought, hands raised, but empty. His rifle was still propped against the stall just out of reach. "You're not law. You have no authority here. This is Ward's jurisdiction. Deputy Ward has been unavoidably detained. A small fire at the freight yard required his immediate attention. Nothing serious, just conveniently time-consuming." Crane's smile widened. "Now, step aside, Mr. Maddow. The woman comes with us. We're done with half measures and legal niceties. Mr. Breton wants his property returned, and I'm authorized to use whatever means necessary to accomplish that objective." "Ward's coming," Lucille started to say. "Ward is occupied, as I mentioned. By the time he extricates himself and investigates this disturbance, we'll be miles away." Crane gestured with his pistol. "Miss Renard, you can walk to the horses voluntarily, or my associates will carry you. The result is identical, but one option involves considerably less bruising. Choose wisely." Lucille's mind raced through options and found none that didn't end with someone shot. Neshoba was calculating the distance to his rifle. She could see it in the tension across his shoulders, the slight shift of his weight. He'd never make it before Crane fired, and at this range, even a mediocre shot would be fatal. She made a decision. "I'll go," she said, stepping around Neshoba before he could stop her. "Don't shoot him. I'll go quietly. That's what Breton wants, isn't it? Me compliant and undamaged?" "Lucille." Neshoba's voice carried warning and desperation in equal measure. "It's done." She met Crane's pale eyes, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Let him live. Take me. I won't fight you." Crane studied her, weighing sincerity against trick, then nodded. "Wise decision. Mr. Maddow, you'll remain in this stable for 10 minutes after we depart. If you follow, if you attempt to interfere, I'll assume hostile intent and respond accordingly. Miss Renard's survival depends entirely on your cooperation." Am I understood? Neshoba's jaw clenched so tight, the muscles bulged, but he nodded fractionally. Crane's companions grabbed Lucille's arms and hustled her toward the door. As she passed Neshoba, she leaned close and whispered urgently, "The letters. Get them to Ward. Make this mean something." His hand brushed hers for just an instant, his fingers squeezing once acknowledgement promise goodbye, compressed into a single touch. Then they shoved her outside into the street where horses waited already saddled and ready. The street was empty, whatever fire Crane had set as distraction had drawn everyone to the freight yard. Perfect planning. Perfect execution. They boosted her onto a saddle, and Crane swung up behind her, reaching around to hold the reins. His other hand held a pistol pressed against her ribs, cold steel through fabric. "Try anything foolish, and I'll put this bullet through your spine," he murmured against her ear. "You'll live paralyzed, probably, but alive enough for Mr. Breton's purposes. Behave, and you arrive intact. Your choice." They spurred the horses and galloped out of Thunder Valley, heading east, leaving chaos and shouting and one Lakota scout with a handful of letters and murder in his dark eyes. For 3 brutal hours, they rode hard across open prairie, changing direction twice to confuse pursuit. Lucille's wrists were bound to the saddle horn with rawhide that cut into her skin. Her back ached from the punishing pace and from Crane's arm around her waist, holding her in place. She tried to memorize landmarks, even in darkness. A lightning-struck cottonwood, a dry wash with distinctive rock formations, a line of bluffs silhouetted against the stars. But exhaustion and fear blurred everything together. They stopped to rest the horses near a cluster of boulders as false dawn began to gray the eastern horizon. Crane dismounted and pulled her down, roughly cutting the wrist bonds, but immediately tying her ankles together before she could think to run. He pushed her to sit against a boulder while his companions watered the horses and checked their gear. "Thirsty?" Crane pulled a canteen from his saddle. She nodded, mouth too dry for words. He held it to her lips and let her drink 3 swallows, then pulled it away and drank himself. She used those seconds to work her hands toward her skirt pocket where the folding knife still nested. If she could reach it, hide it, wait for an opening. Looking for this. Crane held up the knife, having palmed it from her pocket while she was distracted by water. He smiled. "You're predictable, Miss Renard. Resourceful, I'll grant you, but predictable. This is the 2nd time I've had to confiscate weapons from you. You'd think you'd learn. What happens when we reach Montreal?" She needed him talking distracted while she scanned for anything she could use as a weapon, a rock, a stick, anything. "You sign Mr. Breton's contract and begin repaying your debt through honest work. 7 years should suffice to clear what you owe plus expenses for your recovery. After that, if you've been cooperative, you'll be released with a small severance payment, if you've caused trouble." He shrugged. "Let's just say 7 years can become considerably longer for difficult employees. You call it employment. It's slavery. Slavery is illegal throughout the territories. This is simply contract labor, entirely legitimate under territorial and federal law. Mr. Breton's attorneys are quite skilled at drafting enforceable documents that withstand legal scrutiny." Crane crouched in front of her, studying her face with clinical interest. "You know what's remarkable about you, Miss Renard. You actually thought you could escape. 5 women before you tried the same desperate flight westward. All 5 ended up exactly where you're heading. Breton always collects. Always. The sooner you accept that reality, the easier your adjustment will be." Fury burned through Lucille's exhaustion, sharp and clarifying. "Those women, the 5 before me, where are they now?" "Fulfilling their contracts in various establishments, working off their debts like responsible adults." "Are they alive?" Something shifted behind Crane's eyes, a flicker of discomfort quickly masked. Most of them. The territories are dangerous. Accidents happen. You're a slaver and a murderer. She said it flatly, fact not accusation. I'm a businessman who solves problems for clients. He stood dusting off his knees. Rest while you can. We ride again in 30 minutes. By nightfall, we'll reach Piedmont Junction. The eastbound train leaves at dawn tomorrow. By this time next week, you'll be back in Montreal where you belong, and all of this unpleasantness will be a fading memory. He walked toward his companions to check on the horses. Lucille tested the ankle bonds, tight, professionally, tied no give. She scanned her surroundings with new urgency. The boulders created a small maze of passages. If she could get her ankles free, if she could reach those passages before they grabbed her, she might lose them in the rocks long enough to hide until Neshoba came. Because he would come. She knew that with absolute certainty. He would come, even if it meant riding alone against 3 armed men, even if it meant dying in the attempt. He had promised to keep her safe, and Neshoba Mato kept his promises. She just needed to survive long enough for him to reach her. The closest companion, a stocky man with a knife scar across his cheek, approached, carrying rope, clearly intending to bind her more securely for transport. As he bent down, Lucille drove her joined ankles upward with all her strength, catching him under the chin. His head snapped back with a crack of teeth slamming together. He staggered, stunned. She didn't think. She rolled sideways, toppled the rock she'd been leaning against, smaller than it looked, thank God, and used it as leverage to stand despite bound ankles. She hopped toward the boulder maze in an awkward, lurching gait that was half jump, half controlled fall. Crane shouted. A gunshot cracked the bullets, sparking off rock 3 feet to her left. She dove into a gap between boulders, barely wide enough for her body, wedging herself through into a narrow passage that twisted between massive stones. Another shot the bullet whining overhead. She kept moving, squeezing through spaces that scraped her shoulders and tore her already ruined dress. Behind her, boots crunched on gravel. Crane's voice still calm. There's nowhere to go, Miss Renard. These rocks end after 50 yards. You're trapping yourself. She ignored him, focused on moving forward deeper into the maze. Her bound ankles made every movement agonizing, but terror and determination drove her on. She found a narrow crevice, wedged herself inside, and used sharp edges of stone to saw at the rawhide around her ankles. The rock was rough basalt, volcanic glass edges, sharp enough to cut. She scraped the bonds across it, desperately feeling skin tear, as well as leather blood, making everything slippery. The rawhide parted. Her ankles came free. She was 20 yards into the boulder field, now hidden in a crevice, barely wide enough to breathe. She heard Crane and his men searching boots, scraping stone, voices calling to each other. They were systematically checking passages, working inward. Minutes before they found her. She waited until Boots passed within arm's reach, then scrambled out of the crevice and ran in the opposite direction, heading for the far edge of the boulder field. If she could reach open ground, she could run. She was lighter, probably faster despite exhaustion. She could. A hand grabbed her torn sleeve. She spun, swinging wild with her fist, connecting with something soft. A grunt of pain. She tore free and ran blindly, emerging from the boulders into the pre-dawn grayness. Open prairie stretched in every direction. No cover. Nowhere to hide. She ran anyway. Behind her, Crane emerged from the rocks, pistol raised. Stop running. The next shot won't miss. She didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Her legs pumped, boots pounding, earth lungs burning. A gunshot cracked. Something tugged her skirt but didn't slow her. Another shot. This one closer, close enough to feel the shock wave. Then hoofbeats. Not from behind, from ahead. Riders appeared over a low rise, silhouetted against the lightening sky. 4 of them. No 5. Coming fast. Neshoba led them, rifle across his pommel face set in lines of cold fury. Beside him rode Deputy Ward's shotgun ready. Behind them, 3 Lakota warriors from the upriver camp, armed with rifles and bows faces, painted for war. Crane hesitated, calculating odds, then lowered his pistol. Ward, this is a legal debt collection. Don't interfere. Legal? Ward's laugh was bitter. We found letters in Cole's office. Correspondence between him and Breton detailing the entire scheme, luring women west, capturing them, selling them like cattle. That's kidnapping and unlawful procurement across territorial lines, Crane. Federal crime. You're under arrest. Those letters were obtained illegally. They were obtained during investigation of arson and attempted murder. Cole set that fire himself to destroy evidence. We have witnesses who saw him tampering with oil lamps in his own storeroom. He's in custody, singing like a bird to save his own skin, blaming everything on you and Breton. Ward spurred closer, shotgun never wavering. Drop your weapons, all of you. You're done. For a stretched heartbeat, it could have gone either way. Then one of Crane's companions dropped his pistol in the dust. The second followed. Crane held out longest, pale eyes, calculating, then finally let his weapon fall. Breton will have attorneys here within days, he said flatly. This won't stand. Breton's in federal custody in St. Louis, Ward replied. Marshall's office raided his operation 3 days ago, based on complaints from families whose daughters disappeared. He's facing 20 years in a state penitentiary under federal authority. You're welcome to join him. Lucille's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, shaking so violently her teeth chattered. Neshoba was off his horse and beside her in seconds, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, checking for injuries with gentle hands. You hurt, did they? He couldn't finish the question. I'm all right. Scared and exhausted, but not hurt. She gripped his arm, needing something solid to anchor to. You came. Did you doubt it? Not for a second. She managed a wavering smile. Though I was starting to wonder about your timing. Had to stop at the camp for help. Couldn't chase 3 armed men alone. That's just stupidity, not bravery. He pulled her to her feet carefully. Can you ride? I can do whatever needs doing to get away from here. Ward and the Lakota warriors were binding Crane and his companions, with efficient brutality, searching them for hidden weapons, confiscating money and documents. The letters from Cole's office sat in Ward's saddlebag, evidence that would seal Crane's fate. As the sun finally broke the horizon, painting the prairie gold and rose, they began the journey back to Thunder Valley. Crane and his men bound across saddles like game animals, Ward and the Lakota warriors, as escort Neshoba, riding beside Lucille with one hand always within reach of hers, as though afraid she might vanish if he didn't maintain contact. Chayton? Lucille asked quietly during a rest stop. Neshoba's face closed. Still alive when I left, but fading. My mother and aunts are with him. They'll make sure he's not alone at the end. I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not your fault. He made choices, some good, some terrible. He'll answer for them to the Creator, not to me. He looked at her, then really looked, seeing past the exhaustion and fear to something deeper. When I thought Crane had taken you, when I thought I might never see you again. He stopped, searching for words. I realized something. Whatever this thing is between us, whatever it's becoming, I want the chance to see where it leads. If you want that too. Lucille's throat closed around too many emotions to name. I want that. Very much. He nodded, something easing in his expression, and they rode on toward home. Climax. They reached Thunder Valley at mid-morning to find the town in controlled chaos. The freight yard fire, Crane's distraction, had been contained quickly, but not before destroying half a season's stored hay and damaging the loading platform. Dr. Hart stood in the middle of the street directing traffic, her voice cutting through the confusion like a knife organizing repair crews and ensuring the wounded from the mine collapse weren't neglected in the new crisis. When she spotted Ward's party approaching with prisoners, she halted mid-instruction and stared. "Silas Ward, you'd better have a damned good explanation for why half my town is either burned or bleeding." "Got explanations and evidence both." Ward dismounted, pulled the letters from his saddlebag, and handed them to her. "Read these. Cole and this bastard Crane have been kidnapping and unlawfully procuring women for months. Lucille was meant to be another transaction. Might have been if Neshoba hadn't moved fast." Hart scanned the letters, her face darkening with each page. When she finished, she looked at Crane with an expression that would have frozen alcohol. "You came into my town. You put on a civilized face and pretended to be conducting legitimate business. And all along, you were hunting a terrified woman like she was livestock." "I was executing a legal contract," Crane began. "You were slaving. Don't dress it up in legal language to make yourself feel better." She turned to Ward. "Lock 'em up, all three. I'll get statements from Lucille, from Neshoba, from everyone who witnessed anything. We'll build a case that no territorial court can ignore. Already ahead of you. But we've got a bigger problem." Ward gestured toward the trading post, where smoke still hung in the air from the previous night's fire. "Cole's in my jail too, and he's talking. Claims he set the storeroom fire himself, got panicked after we found the letters about his arrangement with Breton, thought destroying inventory would somehow muddy the investigation. Instead, it just proved arson. But here's the thing, he's willing to testify against Crane and Breton in exchange for leniency. Says he can provide names, dates, at least 4 other women they trafficked through Thunder Valley in the past year." Hart absorbed this, calculating. "If Cole testifies, can you make federal charges stick?" "With what we've got, absolutely. The territorial marshal is already on his way from the capital. I sent a rider yesterday with copies of the correspondence. Should be here within 2 days. Cole and Crane can share a cell until then." Lucille slid down from Neshoba's horse legs, barely holding her weight. The morning had caught up with her all at once. The desperate flight through the boulder field, the terrifying moments facing Crane's pistol, the ride back, holding herself together through sheer willpower. Now that she was safe, her body was insisting on rest. Hart caught her elbow, steadying her. "Inside the surgery. Now. I need to check you for injuries, and you need to sleep somewhere that isn't a saddle or the ground." "I'm fine." "You're in shock and running on fumes. Inside. That's an order, not a suggestion." Neshoba walked with them, still maintaining that protective proximity. At the surgery door, he stopped. "I need to get back to camp. Chayton." "Go," Lucille said softly. "I'll be here when you get back." "I'm not going anywhere." He touched her face, just his fingertips along her jaw, then turned and swung back onto his horse. She watched him ride north until he disappeared beyond the edge of town, and then let Hart pull her inside. The surgery was organized chaos. Patients from the mine collapse still occupied every horizontal surface. The Chinese woman who had helped before was changing bandages with quiet efficiency. And Amos Green lay propped against pillows, his breathing easier, now color better. He raised a hand in greeting when he saw Lucille. "Heard you had some trouble," he rasped. "Nothing I couldn't handle with help." She managed a smile. "How are the ribs? Healing? Doc says another month before I can lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. But at least I'm breathing without feeling like someone's driving nails through my chest." He paused. My boy told me what you did helping with the sick folks, working yourself near to death when you didn't have to. Thank you. That means something to people here. I was just doing what needed doing. That's all any of us can do. He settled back against his pillows. Welcome to Thunder Valley, Miss Renard. For what it's worth, I hope you stay. Hart guided Lucille to the back room, the same place where they'd hidden the medical bag weeks ago. The bag still sat under the surgical cabinet, dusty but intact. Hart pulled it out and set it on a table. This is yours. Ward says the property dispute is resolved. Cole's criminal charges invalidate any claim he had to neutral custody, and Crane's arrest voids Breton's collection attempt. The bag and its contents belong to you, free and clear. She opened it, revealing the bundled banknotes, the promissory note, Jean-Paul's letters, the forged certificate. What do you want to do with it? Lucille stared at the money. $150, maybe a bit more. A fortune by frontier standards. Enough to start over anywhere she chose. Enough to buy passage to California or Oregon, to set herself up in a new city with a new name to run one more time. She closed the bag. Keep it here for now. Safe. I'll decide later. Fair enough. Hart pressed a hand to Lucille's forehead, checking for fever, then examined her torn and bloody ankles where the rawhide had cut deep. These need cleaning and bandaging. Sit still. While Hart worked, Lucille found herself drifting, exhaustion pulling her under like deep water. She was vaguely aware of carbolic sting, of bandages being wrapped, of being guided to a cot in the corner. She tried to protest. There were patients who needed the space more than she did. But Hart shushed her with a firmness that brooked no argument. Sleep. Everything else can wait. She slept. When she woke, the light through the window was different late afternoon, judging by the angle. She sat up carefully, head swimming, and found Dr. Hart sitting at her desk, writing in a ledger. How long? 6 hours. You needed it. Hart didn't look up from her writing. Neshoba came by an hour ago. Chayton passed this morning peacefully, surrounded by family. They're preparing him for burial according to their customs. Neshoba said to tell you he'll be back tomorrow after the ceremonies are complete. Lucille's chest tightened. She hadn't known Chayton well, had barely spoken to him beyond that one desperate night when he was dying. But his death still hurt, the loss of potential, the waste of a young life taken too soon. I wish I could have helped him. Nobody could have helped him. Consumption takes who it takes, and medicine only delays the inevitable. Hart finally looked up, her expression softening. But you tried. That matters to Neshoba. That matters to Chayton's family. Don't discount that. A commotion outside interrupted them, raised voices, not angry, but excited. Hart rose and went to the door, Lucille following on unsteady feet. In the street, a crowd had gathered around Deputy Ward, who stood on the surgery steps, holding up his hands for quiet. Listen up, Ward's voice carried clearly. I've got news from the railroad crew at the gorge. The temporary footbridge is complete and certified safe for wagon traffic. First supply train is scheduled to cross tomorrow morning. That means flour, medicine, lamp oil, everything we've been short on for 2 months. Prices should drop back to normal within a week once competition resumes. A cheer went up, spontaneous and heartfelt. People embraced, children jumped and shouted, even the exhausted rescue crews managed smiles. Hope, Lucille realized. The sound of a community that had been drowning, finally finding air. Ward waited for the noise to subside. Second piece of news. Cole's made a full confession. He's identified 4 other women Breton's operation trafficked through Thunder Valley in the past 18 months. Marshal's office is opening investigations into all of them. Cole will testify in exchange for a reduced sentence, still going to prison. but for years instead of decades. Crane and his associates are being transferred to federal custody tomorrow. They're facing 20 years minimum in a state penitentiary under federal authority. Another cheer, this one edged with something darker satisfaction in seeing justice done, relief that monsters would be caged. Lucille felt that relief singing in her own veins. Crane would never hunt another desperate woman. Breton would rot in prison. Cole would spend the rest of his life paying for his greed. It was enough. It had to be enough. Third thing, Ward continued, and his voice gentled. Chayton Maddow passed this morning. He was a young man who made some bad choices born from desperation. But he also did good in his time, helped with translations, taught some of our children to track game, shared his people's knowledge of plants and medicines with anyone who asked. His family's holding ceremonies tonight up at their camp. Anyone who wishes to pay respects is welcome, but bring gifts of food or tobacco, not flowers. That's their custom. The crowd quieted respect for the dead, overriding celebration. Several people nodded already, making mental notes of what they could contribute. Ward stepped down, and the crowd began to disperse, people returning to their work with lighter steps and easier hearts. Dr. Hart turned to Lucille. You want to go to the ceremony tonight? Is it appropriate? I barely knew him. You tried to help him when you could have walked away. That makes it appropriate. Hart pulled out her medical bag and extracted a small pouch. Tobacco, good quality. Give this to Neshoba's mother with my respects. Tell her Chayton was a brave young man who deserved better than the hand fate dealt him. Lucille took the pouch, holding it carefully. Thank you for everything. You've been... Her voice caught. You've been kinder to me than I had any right to expect. You earned it. Hart's expression softened. Now go clean yourself up. You look like you've been dragged through a thorn bush backward. There's a dress in the back room. One of the patients left it as payment last month, never claimed it. Should fit you well enough. Take it. The dress was simple brown calico, worn but clean and mended with neat stitches. It fit reasonably well with some adjustments. Lucille washed at the surgery basin, scrubbing away layers of dust and blood and fear, then braided her hair into something approaching respectability. When she looked in Hart's small mirror, she barely recognized herself, thinner than she'd been in Montreal, sun darkened, harder in the eyes. But also somehow more solid, more present, more real. She walked to the livery to collect what little she still owned, just the clothes she was wearing. The folding knife Neshoba had given her, the red kerchief that marked her as under his protection. Everything else had burned or been lost. It should have felt devastating, losing every physical connection to her past. Instead, it felt like shedding skin that no longer fit, emerging raw but new. As sunset painted the sky in shades of copper and gold, she began the walk north toward the Lakota camp. She was halfway there when Neshoba appeared on the trail, riding south, clearly coming to find her. He dismounted when he saw her, and they stood facing each other in the dusty trail while the light faded around them. I heard about Chayton, she said softly. I'm so sorry. He's at peace now. The suffering's over. Neshoba's voice was rough with exhaustion and grief. He asked about you at the end. Wanted to know if you were safe. I told him yes. That seemed to ease him. I brought tobacco from Dr. Hart. She said to tell your mother Chayton was brave. She'll appreciate that. He looked at her, really looked, taking in the borrowed dress, the bandaged ankles, the way she stood straighter despite everything. You're different. Stronger somehow. I feel different. Like something that was broken finally set properly. She managed to smile. Is that strange? Not strange, just honest. He gestured to his horse. Ride with me. The The ceremony starts soon. She climbed up behind him, arms circling his waist, and they rode north as stars began to emerge overhead. At the camp, fires burned bright and warm. Women had prepared food stew thick with meat and prairie turnips, fry bread, dried berries, mixed with fat. Men gathered in a circle, passing a pipe, speaking in low tones about Chayton's life and deeds. Children played at the edges of the firelight, their laughter a counterpoint to adult grief. Neshoba's mother accepted the tobacco with grave thanks, then pulled Lucille into an embrace that surprised her with its strength and warmth. The older woman spoke in Lakota, and Neshoba translated, "She says you tried to help her son when others would have turned away. She says you have a good spirit and a brave heart. She says you're welcome in our camp always." Tears stung Lucille's eyes. "Tell her thank you. Tell her I'm honored." They sat through the ceremony, singing and prayers and stories about Chayton as a boy, mischievous and clever, always getting into trouble, but quick to make amends. The grief was real and profound, but so was the celebration of a life lived fully in its short span. Lucille understood, sitting there in the firelight, surrounded by people whose language she didn't speak, but whose loss she shared, that this was what community meant. Not just proximity, but interconnection. Shared joy and shared sorrow woven together into something larger than individual threads. Near midnight, the ceremony concluded. Most people retired to their lodges to sleep. Neshoba walked Lucille to the edge of the camp where his horse waited. "I should ride you back to town," he said, though reluctance colored his voice. "Or I could stay." The words emerged before she'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, she didn't want to take them back. "Not in your lodge, I know that wouldn't be appropriate. But maybe with your mother, I'd like to stay tonight if she'd have me. I'd like to not be alone." Neshoba studied her face, reading something there that made him nod slowly. "I'll ask." His mother agreed immediately, gesturing Lucille into the women's lodge where she unrolled a sleeping pallet and provided blankets. Other women settled around them, their soft conversation in Lakota forming a lullaby. Lucille didn't understand, but found comforting nonetheless. She slept dreamlessly deeply and woke to morning light and the smell of cooking fires. Neshoba was waiting outside with breakfast, dried meat, and leftover fry bread, simple but filling. "The marshal arrives today," he said. "Ward sent a runner at dawn. He wants both our statements about what happened with Crane. You ready to face that?" "As ready as I'll ever be." She finished eating and stood brushing crumbs from her borrowed dress. "Let's go finish this properly." They rode back to Thunder Valley together, arriving mid-morning to find the territorial marshal already present, a stern-faced man named Kittredge, with a badge and a reputation for incorruptibility. He took their statements separately, asking detailed questions, making notes, comparing their accounts against Ward's and against the physical evidence. By early afternoon, he was satisfied. Cole will be transferred to the territorial capital to await trial. He'll serve time, substantial time, but his cooperation will count in his favor. Crane and his associates are being transferred to federal custody in St. Louis, where Breton's already incarcerated. They'll be tried together for conspiracy kidnapping and unlawful procurement across territorial lines, kidnapping assault. If convicted, and the evidence suggests they will be, they're looking at 20 to 30 years in a state penitentiary under federal authority. Kittredge closed his notebook with a snap. "Miss Renard, you're free of all claims against your property or person. The original debt was fraudulent, the contract's unenforceable, and Breton's operation is being dismantled as we speak. You're a free woman under territorial and federal law." Free. The word echoed in Lucille's mind. Free. She had been running so long she'd forgotten what freedom felt like. Now it settled over her like a cloak, not weightless, because freedom carried responsibility and choice, but fitting comfortable hers. Thank you, Marshal. Thank Deputy Ward and Mr. Maddow. They're the ones who built the case and took the risks. Kittredge tipped his hat and left, taking his prisoners with him in a wagon bound for the territorial capital. Thunder Valley watched them go in silence, then slowly began to return to something approaching normal life. The first supply wagons crossed the gorge bridge that afternoon, bringing flour and coffee and lamp oil and medicine and 100 other necessities. Prices dropped immediately as competition resumed. Families who had been rationing food began to cook full meals. Hart replenished her medical supplies and finally allowed herself to sleep for more than 4 hours at a stretch. In the midst of recovery and rebuilding, Lucille found herself standing in Hart's surgery, staring at the medical bag and its contents. Still trying to decide what to do with it, Hart asked, coming to stand beside her. The money's mine, earned honestly through work, but keeping it feels like holding on to the past. Lucille picked up the forged certificate, examined it, then tore it in half. This I don't need. I'm not a midwife and never will be. But I can learn to be something useful in other ways. You already are useful. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Hart pulled out a chair and sat. I need an assistant. Someone with steady hands and a strong stomach who can learn quickly. The pay's not much, room and board plus $20 a month, but it's honest work with a future. You interested? $20 a month was more money than Lucille had seen regularly in her entire life. Yes. Absolutely yes. Good. You start tomorrow. Today you rest and figure out the rest of your situation. Hart paused. The money in that bag, you could use it to set yourself up properly. Buy a small house maybe, or start a sewing business on the side. Build something solid here. I was thinking something different. Lucille carefully removed the promissory note evidence of Jean-Paul's original debt proof of Breton's fraud and set it aside to be sent to authorities. Then she counted out the bank notes. $153. A fortune. A future. I was thinking maybe I split it. Some for me to get established, some for Dr. Hart's medicine fund, and some, she stopped an idea forming. Some for Chayton's claim, the placer bar on the North Fork that Cole stole. If Neshoba can recover that claim legally, the gold there could help his people, could help the whole community. I want that to happen. Hart looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. You've got a good heart, Lucille Renard. Don't let anyone tell you different. That afternoon, Lucille walked to the small schoolhouse where teacher Helen Pike was organizing donated books. She explained her idea using some of the money to buy proper textbooks and supplies for the children. Pike's eyes filled with tears. That would change everything. The children here are smart, but they're working with books so old they're falling apart. New books, proper slates, maybe even a globe that would give them a real chance. Then let's make it happen. She visited Amos Green next, offering money for a new water wagon to replace his damaged one. He tried to refuse too much generosity. He couldn't accept it, but she insisted. You saved lives hauling water when you were injured. This is just paying forward the help you've already given. By sunset, she'd distributed more than half the money, keeping $40 for herself, enough to rent a small room-buy fabric for a new dress start. Building a life. The rest went to people and purposes that would strengthen Thunder Valley, weaving her into the community through ties of reciprocity and shared investment. She was walking back to the livery feeling lighter than she had in years when Neshoba found her. Heard you've been busy today. Heard you filed paperwork to recover Chayton's claim. Ward helped. Cole never filed the transfer properly, thought he could just take it and nobody would check. Turns out the Territorial Land Office keeps good records. The claim reverts to Chayton's heir. That's me. He fell into step beside her. Also heard you've been giving away money like you're some kind of frontier philanthropist. Just investing in the community, making sure I have reasons to stay. She glanced at him sideways. Unless you think that's foolish. I think it's the smartest thing I've seen anyone do in a long time. They reached the livery, and he stopped turning to face her in the fading light. Lucille, I need to tell you something. Ask you something, really. Her heart kicked up its pace. All right. There's a cabin on the North Fork near the claim. It's old and needs work, needs a new roof, proper windows, a stove, probably complete rebuilding of the south wall. But the foundation's solid and the location's good. I've been thinking about fixing it up, maybe living there part-time when I'm not staying with my people or scouting for freight outfits. He paused, choosing words carefully. I was thinking, if you were interested, you could help me decide what it needs, how to set it up. Make it into a real home instead of just a place to sleep. And when it's finished, if you wanted, you could share it with me. As a partner. As a wife, eventually, if you'd consider that. I know it's not much to offer. Not a ranch, not wealth, not any of the things you were promised when you came here. But it's real, and it's honest, and it's yours if you want it. Lucille's throat closed around too many emotions. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking if you'd consider building a life with me, starting with a cabin and seeing where it leads. No lies, no contracts, no promises, except the ones we make to each other. He took her hand, his palm warm and rough against hers. I know we haven't known each other long. I know this has all been fast and strange, and probably not how you imagined your life would go. But when I thought I'd lost you when Crane had taken you, and I didn't know if I'd ever see you again, I realized you'd become essential somehow. Like breathing. Like water. I realized I wanted every morning to start with seeing your face, and every evening to end with you beside me. That probably sounds like foolishness. It sounds like the best offer I've ever received. She squeezed his hand, smiling through tears that were somehow happy despite falling. Yes. To the cabin, to building something together, to seeing where this leads. Yes to all of it. He kissed her, then properly this time. Not the desperate brush of lips in a snowstorm, but a real kiss, slow and thorough and promising. His hands cupped her face gently, and she leaned into him, feeling safe and wanted and home. When they finally separated, both breathless, Neshoba pressed his forehead to hers. We'll start work on the cabin next week. Take our time, do it right. In the meantime, stay at heart surgery. Learn everything you can. Build your skills. When we move to the cabin, you'll have real work and real purpose, not just housekeeping. I'd like that. She kissed him again, just a quick press of lips. Thank you, Neshoba. For everything. For protecting me. For believing in me when I barely believed in myself. Thank you for staying. For fighting when running would have been easier. He smiled. Come on. Hart will have dinner ready, and she gets mean when people are late. They walked to the surgery together as stars began to emerge, hands linked, and for the first time since Jean-Paul died, Lucille Renard felt like she was walking toward something instead of running away. Falling action. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm of work and building. Dr. Hart proved to be a demanding but patient teacher, walking Lucille through anatomy basics, showing her how to identify symptoms, teaching her which medicines worked for which conditions. Lucille learned to set simple fracture stitch wounds that were beyond her initial fumbling attempts, recognize the signs of infection before they became deadly. She assisted in 3 childbirths, including twins that came breech, and required every ounce of heart skill to deliver safely. Each success built her confidence. Each loss, and there were losses, because frontier medicine was as much prayer as science taught her humility, and the limits of what even the best care could accomplish. The fever epidemic finally burned itself out as clean water became abundant, and the weakest patients either recovered or died. Thunder Valley's population stabilized. New families arrived via the reopened bridge drawn by tales of available land and mining opportunities. The town began to grow again, building on foundations that felt more solid for having been tested by crisis. Neshoba divided his time between the cabin renovation and his responsibilities to his people. He brought Lucille to the work site on a cool October morning when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled of coming snow. The cabin stood in a meadow beside a clear creek surrounded by pine forest. As he'd said it needed work, the roof had gaps wide enough to see sky and the windows were just holes in the wall, and the south wall leaned at an angle that suggested imminent collapse. "Well," he asked, watching her face, "what do you think?" She circled the structure slowly, assessing with a seamstress's eye for structure and proportion. "I think it's got good bones. I think with proper support and new materials, it could be beautiful. I think I want windows that face east to catch morning light, and I want shelves, lots of shelves, and a work table big enough for me to cut fabric. And a real stove, not just a fire pit. All of that can happen." He pulled out a pencil stub and scrap of paper. "Draw me what you're seeing. Show me how you want the space arranged." She sketched rough layouts while he made notes and suggestions. They spent hours that way, planning and dreaming, arguing pleasantly over details compromising. By afternoon, they had a design that satisfied them, both practical but comfortable, large enough to grow into, but small enough to heat efficiently through Dakota winters. Work began the next week. Neshoba recruited help from both the Lakota camp and Thunder Valley men who owed him favors or simply liked him, plus a few who wanted to ensure the local scout stayed happy and helpful. They raised the south wall properly, replacing rotten logs with fresh timber. They built a stone chimney and installed a second-hand stove Neshoba had traded for with a departing prospector. They cut and fitted glass windows that caught and held light like captured jewels. The roof went up in sections, each layer of shakes precisely overlapped to shed rain and snow. Lucille sewed curtains from fabric she'd bought with her remaining money, simple cotton in colors that complemented the natural wood. She made a quilt for the bed they'd built from pine planks, piecing it together from donated scraps and filling it with goose down a grateful patient had given Hart as payment. She carved shelves into the walls and lined them with her growing collection of medical texts. Hart had loaned her, alongside jars of herbs and dried plants the Lakota women had taught her to identify and use. By mid-November, the cabin was complete. They moved in on a Saturday, carrying their modest possessions in a wagon borrowed from Amos Green. The day was cold, but clear sunlight slanting through the new windows to paint golden rectangles on the plank floor. Neshoba built the first fire in the stove, and they christened the space by cooking a simple meal, venison stew and fry bread coffee strong enough to strip rust. That night, they lay together in the bed they'd built, wrapped in the quilt she'd sewn, listening to the creek sing and the wind whisper in the pines. Neshoba's arm circled her shoulders, and she rested her head in the hollow of his throat, feeling his heartbeat slow and steady against her cheek. "Comfortable?" he asked quietly. "More than I've ever been." She traced patterns on his chest with one finger. "I keep expecting something to go wrong. For this to be another lie, another trap. It feels too good to be real." "It's real. We built it with our own hands. Nobody can take that away or reveal it was false all along." He kissed the top of her head. "Sleep. Tomorrow we start our actual life together. All the days after this one are ours to fill however we choose." She slept deeply and well, and woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee brewing. Neshoba had already started the fire and was cooking something that smelled wonderful, eggs probably, and bacon luxuries saved for special occasions. She dressed quickly in the cold air and joined him at the table. "Good morning, wife," he said with a smile. They weren't officially married yet. That would require a justice or minister, neither of which Thunder Valley currently had, but the word fit felt right, claimed by choice rather than imposed by contract. "Good morning, husband." They ate breakfast while discussing the day's plans. Neshoba had promised to help his uncle repair a collapsed meat-drying rack at the camp. Lucille needed to return to town to assist Hart with a difficult patient who was recovering from a mining accident. They would pursue separate work, then reunite here at evening. Partnership, not possession. Independence woven together by choice and commitment. Over the following months, this pattern became their life. Lucille's medical skills grew steadily. Hart began trusting her with more complex cases, teaching her procedures that bordered on surgical. Lucille discovered she had a particular talent for obstetrics, the infinite patience required to coach a frightened first-time mother through labor, the steady hands needed to guide an infant safely into the world, the quick thinking necessary when complications arose. She assisted in 24 births, by spring losing only 3-1 to a hemorrhage. No medicine could stop one to a cord wrapped tight, one to a mystery that left mother weeping, and Lucille questioning whether she should be doing this work at all. But the successes outnumbered the failures, and Hart's reassurance carried her through the darkest doubts. Every doctor loses patience. Every healer watches people die despite their best efforts. What matters is that you keep trying, keep learning, keep showing up. You're good at this, Lucille. Don't let grief convince you otherwise. Neshoba continued scouting and translating, building his reputation as someone who could bridge the gap between white settlement and native territory. He mediated disputes over grazing rights, helped negotiate fair prices for furs and hides, taught tracker skills to young men from both communities. His presence stabilized interactions that might otherwise have turned violent, and people from both worlds came to respect him for his fairness and lack of cant. The placer claim Chayton had left behind turned out to be more valuable than anyone expected. Working it carefully through spring runoff yielded nearly $200 in gold dust and small nuggets. Neshoba divided the proceeds 3 ways, as Lucille had suggested: 1/3 to his people's camp for supplies and trade goods, 1/3 to Dr. Hart's medicine fund, 1/3 to the schoolhouse for books and materials. The generosity surprised people and earned him goodwill that transcended cultural lines. In April, Deputy Ward received notification that he'd been officially appointed as the town marshal for Thunder Valley, with authority and resources to match. His first act was to demolish what remained of Cole's trading post and sell the salvage. The proceeds funded construction of a proper jail and marshal's office. His second act was to officiate at weddings for 3 couples who had been waiting months for proper legal authority, including one ceremony that joined Neshoba Mato and Lucille Renard in marriage under territorial law. The wedding was simple, held outdoors on a warm May afternoon, with the entire town invited. Lucille wore a dress she'd sewn herself from cream-colored cotton, decorated with Lakota beadwork that Neshoba's mother and aunts had added as a gift. Neshoba wore his best buckskins and a new shirt Lucille had made embroidered at collar and cuffs, with geometric patterns that blended French and Lakota design elements. Dr. Hart stood as witness, gruff and proud. Amos Green played fiddle. Children ran wild in the meadow, while adults ate and drank and celebrated the improbable survival of their community through crisis after crisis. At sunset, Neshoba and Lucille walked back to their cabin, hand in hand, followed by laughter and good wishes, and closed the door on the world. Inside, in the golden lamplight, surrounded by evidence of the life they'd built together, they consummated a marriage that had been forming itself in invisible ways since the moment he'd stood in that saloon doorway and said, Darling, I don't bite. Resolution and final surprise. Summer arrived with heat and growth. The garden Lucille planted flourished potatoes and carrots, beans, climbing poles, squash, spreading across the ground with aggressive abundance. She learned to preserve food for winter, taught by Lakota women who had been practicing the art for generations. She learned to tan leather properly to smoke meat, so it lasted to recognize 100 different plants and their uses. Her hands grew stronger, her body more resilient. She looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the woman staring back, sun-browned, lean with muscle, capable in ways Montreal Lucille could never have imagined. In August, a letter arrived via the Postal Service that had resumed with the bridge's reopening. Deputy Ward delivered it personally, his face grave. This came from the Federal Marshal's office in St. Louis. Thought you'd want to know immediately. Lucille opened it with shaking hands, Neshoba reading over her shoulder. The letter was brief and formal. Miss Lucille Renard, Mrs. Neshoba Matto. This letter serves to inform you that Maurice Breton was convicted on 17 counts of kidnapping and unlawful procurement across territorial lines, fraud, conspiracy, and related charges. He was sentenced to 40 years in a state penitentiary under federal authority. Albert Crane and his associates received similar sentences. Additionally, during investigation of Breton's records, authorities discovered evidence of 4 women who had been reported missing between 1879 and 1881. 3 were located alive in various locations held under fraudulent contracts. They have been released and provided assistance to return home or establish themselves independently. The 4th, Marie Leclerc, was determined to have died in 1880. Her family has been notified. All debts claimed by Breton's operation have been voided by federal court order. No further claims can be made against you or any other woman who was subject to his fraudulent contracts. Case closed. Sincerely, Marshal Thomas Kittredge, Office of the United States Marshal Territory District, Lucille. Read it twice, 3 times, waiting for the words to feel real. 40 years. Breton would die in prison. Crane would die in prison. No one else would suffer what she had suffered. And Marie. Poor Marie, who had taken Breton's employment offer and vanished. Dead these 5 years, probably worked to death or killed when she tried to escape. The friend Lucille had been unable to save, whose fate had driven her to flee rather than submit to the same contract. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Thank you for bringing this. Thought you'd want closure on that chapter of your life. Ward shifted his weight. There's something else. The Territorial Land Office sent documentation finalizing the property transfer. Chayton's claim is officially in your and Neshoba's name jointly. Legal and recorded. Nobody can contest it. We don't need more land. Maybe not. But it's yours now to do with as you see fit. Keep it, sell it, gift it, your choice. Ward tipped his hat. I'll let you folks discuss it in private. After he left, Lucille and Neshoba sat on their cabin's small porch, watching clouds build in the western sky, promising afternoon rain. What do you want to do with the claim? Neshoba asked eventually. I think, Lucille paused, organizing her thoughts. I think we keep working it, but use the proceeds to fund a scholarship. For young people who want to learn trades or professions but can't afford apprenticeships. Medical training, teaching law, things that would help them build real futures. We could work with Dr. Hart and Teacher Pike to identify candidates. Make sure Chayton's legacy is about creating opportunities, not just extracting wealth. Neshoba was quiet for so long, she thought he might object. Then he took her hand and squeezed it gently. Chayton would have liked that. He wanted to build something good, even when he went about it the wrong way. This honors that intent while fixing the method. Yes. Let's do that. They sat in comfortable silence, while the first drops of rain began to fall cool and clean, washing the dust from the air. 2 months later, in October, with the aspens turning gold again and the first snow dusting the higher peaks, Lucille discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually missed monthly courses, exhaustion that felt different from ordinary tiredness, a sensitivity to certain smells. Dr. Hart confirmed it with a knowing smile. About 4 months along, I'd estimate. Due in late March or early April. How do you feel about this? Terrified, Lucille admitted. And happy, both at once. That's the appropriate response to impending parenthood. Hart patted her shoulder. You'll be fine. You've attended enough births to know what to expect, and I'll be right there with you when your time comes. Meanwhile, start taking it easier. No heavy lifting, more rest, better food. Neshoba will fuss, let him. Men need to feel useful during pregnancy. Neshoba did indeed fuss, hovering and worrying, and suggesting she stop working entirely until Hart threatened to ban him from the surgery if he didn't cease his overprotective nonsense. He settled for building a cradle from carefully chosen pine, sanding it, smooth as silk, carving protective symbols into the headboard that blended Lakota and Christian traditions. His mother wove blankets. The women from town donated or made tiny clothes. The community that had formed around crisis now rallied around celebration, everyone invested in the safe arrival of this child, who would be the firstborn of the new Thunder Valley. Winter passed quietly. Lucille continued working under Hart's supervision, learning the things she'd need to know when it was her turn to labor. She learned to trust her body's signals to prepare mentally and physically for the ordeal ahead. She learned that fear and anticipation could coexist, that she could face the unknown with resources she hadn't known she possessed. In early April, as Green returned to the land and the creek ran high with snowmelt, her labor began. It was long, nearly 20 hours, but uncomplicated. Neshoba stayed with her throughout. Despite tradition suggesting men should absent themselves, holding her hand, offering water being the anchor she clung to when pain crested. Dr. Hart oversaw everything with calm efficiency, coaching and encouraging, occasionally giving quiet instructions that Lucille's labor-fogged brain struggled to follow. As dawn light filled the cabin, Lucille's daughter entered the world with a furious cry that seemed to shake the rafters. Hart placed the infant on Lucille's chest, still slippery and perfect, and Lucille looked down into dark eyes that seemed impossibly wise for something so new. She's beautiful. Neshoba whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Perfect. She's ours. Lucille corrected her own tears falling. She's the beginning of whatever comes next. They named her Sarah Chayton Motto Sarah, after Lucille's grandmother, who had taught her to sew Chayton to honor Neshoba's brother, whose death had inadvertently created space for new life. The baby thrived, growing strong on mother's milk and love, and the attention of an entire community that treated her as a shared treasure. One evening in late summer, as Sarah slept in her cradle and Neshoba dozed in a chair, after a long day, Lucille stood on the cabin's porch, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the lies and fear, the desperate flight westward, the moment in that saloon when terror had transformed into the first spark of hope. She thought about Chayton dying in his lodge, about Breton rotting in prison, about Marie, who hadn't survived to find her freedom. She thought about all the versions of herself she'd shed along the way, the frightened widow, the desperate fugitive, the woman willing to base a life on forged papers. Dr. Hart had told her once that people survived by showing up and not running. Lucille had done more than survive. She had built something real from the wreckage of her past, a marriage grounded in respect and love, a skill that served her community. A child who would grow up knowing safety and choice. Neshoba appeared beside her. Sarah cradled in his arms, the baby awake, and gazing around with that serious expression she wore while absorbing the world. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "Everything. How impossibly far I've come. How different this is from anything I imagined when I stepped onto that stagecoach." She leaned against him, feeling his warmth, his solidity. "How grateful I am that William Tahoma didn't exist, because if he had, I never would have found you. I'm grateful for that too, though I wish the path here had been gentler for you. Gentle doesn't forge steel. I needed to be tested to discover what I'm made of." She looked up at him, this man who had stood in a doorway and offered protection when she was drowning in fear, who had fought for her and built with her and loved her with patient steadiness. "I'm made of stronger stuff than I knew. We both are." Sarah made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a coo, but something in between that made them both smile. They carried her back inside, closed the door against the cooling evening, and settled into the life they had earned together through blood and dust and unwavering determination. In Thunder Valley, where a bridge had once collapsed and a community had nearly died, life continued. People healed. Children grew. New families arrived and were woven into the existing fabric. The town built itself stronger on foundations tested by fire and fever and the dark intentions of men who had viewed human beings as property. And in a cabin beside a creek, in a meadow surrounded by pines, Lucille Renard Matto's seamstress, healer wife, mother, looked at her sleeping daughter and knew with bone-deep certainty that she was finally, truly home.